Pete Hegseth testifying before the House Armed Services Committee amid a deeply unpopular war that is grinding toward a second month. And the mood was contentious even before the questioning started. Protesters confronted Hegseth on his way into the hearing.
You should be disgusted with yourself.
You need to be arrested.
Not to be outdone, Hegseth then used his opening statement to attack the war's critics, calling them the, quote, biggest challenge. Take a listen.
The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans.
In return, those reckless, feckless Democrats accused Hegseth of breathtaking hypocrisy, namely accusing his critics of being reckless and feckless while leading a war that has proceeded in the absence of congressional approval and any clear endpoint. Take a listen.
You have been lying to the American public about this war from day one, and so has the president. The strategy has been an outstanding example of incompetence. This war of choice is a political and economic disaster at every level.
You were incompetent then. You're incompetent now.
Do you believe that the president is mentally stable enough to be the commander-in-chief?
Did you ask the same question of Joe Biden for 4 years?
Joe Biden is not the president.
You need to resign immediately.
It's the incompetence.
Hegseth testified that the cost of the Iran war has hit $25 billion so far. That is an enormous figure, but according to Politico, it, quote, falls far behind many outside estimates. Hegseth dodged other critical questions on the Hill today. He refused to give an estimate on the timeline for withdrawal from Iran. He refused to say whether he is, quote, beholden to the president or whether he's beholden to the Constitution. He also refused to say whether he had advised the president to go to war. And then there was this. He got tripped up on a key point. Take a listen.
Their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
my time for
we're
just
watching
a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of...
So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before.
Joining me now to kick things off tonight is the admirable Admiral John Kirby, the former White House National Security Communications Advisor. He is also an MS Now National Security Analyst. Admiral, even some of the Republicans say that the Trump administration has failed to provide a compelling rationale for this war or to articulate what the endgame is here. Do you think that Secretary Hegseth provided any clarity today with this jaunt on the Hill?
I think there were some missed opportunities for the secretary today. I think this would have been a terrific chance for him to lay out what the strategic objectives are and how they're going after each and every one of them. And I didn't see anything in the hearing today, and I watched a lot of it that convinced me that they were actually trying to answer that question. It was a missed opportunity for sure to lay out to the American people finally. I mean, it's been 60 days before the secretary testified finally to lay out why we're doing this and why now.
Well, there have been a lot of questions about the strike on the Iranian girls' school. This happened in the early days of the war. And today, Democratic Congressman Adam Smith brought it up. Let's take a listen to that exchange between the congressman and the secretary.
The girls' school that got hit in the first days of this war. There is absolutely no question at this point what happened. We made a mistake, and that happens in war. We identified this target based on earlier charts, and yet 2 months after it happened, we refused to say anything about it, giving the world the impression that we just don't care. We do not care about the casualties and the chaos that is caused by our war, and we should care.
What do you make of the fact that military leadership has refused to take ownership of what many are regarding as a colossal mistake?
I think it's important for the United States military to complete this investigation as quickly as possible. I'm frankly a little surprised that it's taken this long, although I know there's a lot of interagency coordination that has to go into laying out the findings conclusively. But I think it's important to wrap this up quickly and to be completely transparent with the American people about what happened, why it happened, and more critically, how we're going to prevent it from happening in the future. I know that the U.S. Central Command did a thorough job here. I've talked to some officials there. I think there's a process problem here that it's taken too long to work its way through, but it's imperative. And Representative Smith is not wrong. I mean, we should come clean on this so that we can more importantly learn from it and prevent it from happening again.
What does it mean, though, that we won't acknowledge that perhaps a mistake was made here? Even in the absence of a conclusive investigation, something obviously went wrong.
I want to believe, Melissa, that what's slowing this down is the interagency coordination process, because the preliminary findings, at least as reported in the press, made it seem like it was the intelligence was perhaps old that was applied to the targeting solution, and the intelligence that was provided to the military came from outside the military. So I want to believe that what's slowing this down is the coordination process with the intelligence community, and they'll wrap this up quickly. That's the generous view. I think the cynic's view would be that this administration doesn't like to admit mistakes, doesn't like to apologize, doesn't like to show what they consider weakness. But it's not weakness. If you've made a mistake, if you've hit something in error, then admit it as soon as you possibly can and tell the public what you're going to do to try to prevent it from happening again. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's confidence. That's security in your process and in your military capabilities. And that's not what's being transmitted to the American people right now. Again, I want to believe this is a process problem and not a policy problem. But the cynics, I understand, are out there thinking that this is more of a policy issue.
Well, the cynics are not just focused on that particular issue. They also have raised concerns over Hegseth's personnel decisions. Take a listen to Congressman Don Bacon.
I share a bipartisan concern of the firings that we've seen at the Pentagon. 4 of the 6 service chiefs, for example, the Coast Guard. We had a huge bipartisan majority here that had confidence in the Army Chief of Staff and the Secretary of Navy. And I would just point out, it may be constitutionally right. You have the constitutional right to do these things, but it doesn't make it right or wise.
So there have been a lot of discussion of these personnel firings within the military, and some news outlets, including the New York Times, have noted that women and minorities appear to bear the brunt of these firings. Yeah. What do you make of this shift in the personnel, and what does it mean for the fighting force that is incredibly diverse, as our armed forces are, to have a leadership structure that may be less diverse in terms of race and gender than it has been in the past?
It's hard to know exactly how to answer that question because they haven't been transparent.
55% of Fox News viewers just told Fox News that Trump does not have the mental soundness to serve as president. No MSNBC viewers, not CNN viewers, Fox News, the network that has spent a decade building him up, defending him, covering for him, is now publishing polls showing that even his own audience has lost confidence in his basic cognitive fit. That number will not go back down. Polling on mental fitness does not reverse. Once the perception sets in that scale, it compounds. And the Iran war is the clearest evidence why that perception exists.
We now turn to a landmark Supreme Court decision with stark implications for American elections. Today, the court's conservative supermajority struck down a Louisiana voting map as unconstitutional, finding that lawmakers, quote, illegally used race when drawing a new majority black district. The 6-3 decision split along predictable ideological lines. The majority opinion, written by Justice Samuel Alito, asserted that the ruling preserves a central tenet of the Voting Rights Act. His opinion reads, quote, allowing race to play any part in government decision-making represents a departure from the constitutional rule that applies in almost any other context. In a scathing dissent, which she read from the bench, Justice Elena Kagan slammed the majority for laying the groundwork for what she called the largest reduction in minority representation since the era following Reconstruction. Justice Kagan wrote that the majority's ruling licenses states to, quote, dilute minority citizens' voting power. And while the majority claims that this is merely an update to the law, Justice Kagan, writing for the 3 Democratic appointees, disagreed sharply, maintaining that the decision, quote, eviscerates the law. She called the decision, quote, the latest chapter in the majority's now completed demolition of the Voting Rights Act. During oral arguments back in October, Justice Kagan asked Janae Nelson of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, who represented a group of black voters, what the stakes were in this case. Take a listen.
What would the results on the ground be?
I think the results would be pretty catastrophic. If we take Louisiana as one example, every congressional member who is black was elected from a VRA opportunity district. We only have the diversity that we see across the South, for example, because of litigation that forced the creation of opportunity districts under the Voting Rights Act.
Today's ruling is a sad departure from decades of precedent, and it is also a very sad development for a law that was a signature key accomplishment of the civil rights era, landmark legislation that sought to protect minorities from discriminatory voting practices. Critically, today's ruling is the latest in a series of decisions from the High Court that over the last decade have incrementally hobbled the Voting Rights Act. Louisiana, a state with a sizable black population, will likely now lose one majority black Democratic district. And the ruling also opens the door for other states to redraw their congressional maps ahead of an already contentious midterm election year. Today, lawmakers spoke out about the ruling.
This decision today by the Supreme Court is a slap in the face. This is one huge step backwards for racial justice and for the health of our democracy.
It is an attack on a crown jewel of our democracy.
It's not Donald Trump or his Supreme Court majority that should be the ones to decide who gets to represent you in Congress. It's the American people.
Joining me now to break all of this down is the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here on MS Now. He is also the president and founder of the National Action Network. Also with us tonight is Leah Lippman, a law professor at the University of Michigan and my co-host on the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Rev, let's get right into it. The Voting Rights Act was already hobbled after years of the Supreme Court incrementally chipping away at it. What does this ruling mean for voting rights in the United States for African Americans and other minorities?
Well, it was hobbled. Now it's destroyed, in effect. And this shoots in the heart of voting rights and civil rights, because what they're saying is that you can no longer deal with the fact that there was racial exclusion, and therefore you must be able to hold people accountable for continuing a racially exclusive kind of policy. And if you mention race saying that it was being exclusionary, then you can't do it. Well, then how do you remedy the fact that we were, people act like we're asking for something. Right. We only are saying to remake what you did to us. That's an affirmative move was made against us.
So this is an important point. The map here was a remedial map drawn after Louisiana engaged in what the black voters termed a racial gerrymander and what a court found to be a racial gerrymander. And so the court ordered Louisiana to draw a new map that created an additional black opportunity voting district. And the court in this decision now says that the consideration of race in drawing that district is itself unconstitutional.
And what you then have the effect, so you have the huge population of blacks in Louisiana. We'll put y'all all in one district. And the ones of you that don't live in that district, you won't matter anyway. Yeah. And so we can end up with several white congressmen from Louisiana and one black. And that's fair and equal because you can't bring up race. And that's what they will try to do all over the country is lump one district two at the most, and have the rest of the state in smaller populated districts, because you're not even talking about the same population, smaller populated districts. So in effect, you will have the number of blacks in Congress and in state legislatures and in city councils minimum. So we will have minimum input, but we're going to have to pay the same taxes.
And this really prompted outrage from inside the chamber. So Justice Kagan chose to read her dissent from the bench. It's a very unusual step. Insiders in the courtroom said that she struck a defiant tone and was clearly upset when she was reading this. And she was especially aggrieved when she read the parts where she disagreed with the majority's claim that they were, quote unquote, preserving the central tenets of the VRA. Is this a preservation of the Voting Rights Act, or has the court effectively overruled Voting Rights Act, decades of precedents, and basically hobbled this statute?
I think they've effectively nullified it. Justice Alito's majority opinion made it all but impossible to establish a violation of the Voting Rights Act, saying that in order for plaintiffs to succeed on a Section 2 claim to establish illegal racial discrimination in redistricting, they have to show that you can create an additional majority-minority district, including a majority-black district, that would result in the same partisan breakdown as the state's chosen partisan breakdown, i.e. that the majority-black district would have to vote Republican. This is, of course, describing a null set. So by making it impossible to establish a violation of the Voting Rights Act, he's all but nullified the law. You know, Justice Kagan obviously read her dissent with passion. In the oral argument later that morning, she said, "I'm losing my voice. I lost my voice," indicating maybe how emphatic she was.
All right. Rev, this ruling, many commentators have noted, will likely create new GOP districts across the South. The New York Times mapped this out, what this region might look like. Here's what the map currently looks like, with Democrats holding around 24 seats. And here is the plausible redistricting scenario without the input of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. It shows Republicans gaining 12 more seats. Can we expect other states to begin pushing to take advantage of this ruling ahead of the midterms? Florida has already passed a law through its legislature to redistrict their seats going forward. They've already.
I think you absolutely can look for other states to try to take advantage of it. I think that this is something that was projected when many of us were saying that don't ignore Project 2025. They're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. And those of us in the civil rights community that was warning of this, we were alarmists. Well, we're here now. And we're now going to have to deal with the fact. And let's remember that blacks and whites went to the South and fought to get the Voting Rights Act. Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner, two Jews and a black, were killed for fighting for the Voting Rights Act. So was Viola Luisa. So this was not just blacks saying this. These were blacks and whites saying, let's uphold democracy. And here we are getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country. And going in, we're reminding blacks, oh, you can't bring up race. You're not equal. In fact, you weren't even independent in 1776.
Leah, I want to come back to something that you said about Justice Alito's majority opinion. As you mentioned, he seemed especially concerned about the question of polarized voting and partisanship in these redistricting cases. And he seemed to be saying that while partisanship is fine, it's fine to draw districts according to partisanship, it's not okay to rely on race. What's the relationship between race and partisan affiliation, though, in many of these areas in the South?
Race and party are very closely correlated. There's racially polarized voting. You know, by some estimates, 70 to 80% of minority voters might be registered Democrats. And so the correlation between them makes it virtually impossible to disentangle them.
And he seemed to be saying that when these claims are presented as racial gerrymanders, in fact, they're just permissible partisan gerrymanders. Can they be both?
They can be both, and it can still be a racial gerrymander, even where a state says it is advancing partisan aims, because they are still suppressing and diluting the voting power of racial minorities. But essentially, Justice Alito gave them a green light to engage in partisan gerrymandering, and in so doing, dilute and suppress Black voting power.
Another member of the conservative bloc, Justice Thomas, said that he would have gone further and would say that the Voting Rights Act doesn't even apply in circumstances relating to districting at all. What do you make of that? Is that an invitation for new litigation to further hobble the Voting Rights Act?
Well, he said he would have gone further. He also indicated he was basically fine with the majority opinion, which would do well enough, since it would basically bring the redistricting litigation to a close. So while Justice Alito's majority opinion protested that they weren't ending the Voting Rights Act, Justice Thomas has always kind of let the cat out of the bag and said, no, we're basically ending any districting challenges under the Voting Rights Act, and that's a good thing.
In a single 24-hour period, he said the war going swimmingly, that Iran had agreed to never close the strait again, that a deal was expected in next day or two, and that Iranians had agreed everything. None of it was true. Not one word. The strait is still contested. No deal exists. And now there are 3 air carriers in the region, the highest concentration of American military force since 2003, which Obama's former Iran negotiator says probably not there for not 30,000 troops. That is not negotiation posture.
What we've seen in Donald Trump's playbook, when there's big news, when there's headlines that he can't get away from, that he doesn't like, and you can take your pick, whether it's the economy or whether it's the war in Iran, what Donald Trump does is creates big distractions, and then we all chase the distraction, and then we move on from this. This time, obviously the media follows the distractions because we cover the news. But this time, the thing that's on my mind, I just don't know if this game of distract and divert is going to work with the American voter, because whether it's just general affordability and the economy or the war in Iran that we do not have a large voting bloc supporting, it doesn't actually matter what's happening in the news, because scores of Americans, sad for us, don't pay attention to the news, but they know what their life costs.
Well,
they
I'll
know
tell
what their
you,
groceries cost.
I filled up gas the other day, and I follow the news all the time. I know what the price of a barrel of oil is at all times. I know what the national average is for the price of gas.
Glad. That's
but
what you
there's
do for a
nothing
living.
like filling up your tank to make all of that not an abstraction, or to buy your groceries, or to think about people. You and I are not those people. We do not have to make a decision about filling our gas tank or eating dinner tonight. But there are people in this country who actually have to, and this is not new, Stephanie. We've covered this during government shutdowns. We've covered it during COVID. We've covered it during the 2008 financial crisis, where we know how close people live to the bone. It's not great in the richest country in the world that that's the way it is. That's how unequal it is. But for a lot of people, this is not an abstraction. You don't get to think about the nobility of a war with Iran or whatever the case is. You have to live your daily life. And I'm with you. You can only distract so much when people, every election, people say, the economy is going to be the most important thing. The economy is almost always the most important thing in every election. And it is getting very hard for people to justify, maybe he's really showing those Iranians what they need to be shown when I'm paying, for gas.
This is my point, right? You can send us tracking the president and the first lady's fight with Jimmy Kimmel, and we can have debates about the importance of free speech. But what keeps Donald Trump in the headlines every day is that he's the president of the United States, and that Republicans can control Congress.
Yes.
And what these policies are doing are not just hurting people who are living paycheck to paycheck, but all sorts of people, right? We often judge a president based on the economy, and usually,
and sometimes it's fair and sometimes it's not.
But that's it. Usually a president is presiding over an economy,
correct,
and then they get blamed for it. In this case, the economic woes that we face are a direct result to this president's policy changes.
And I want to point out, just take COVID, for example. You may like or not like how the Biden administration handled everything from the economy to vaccines, but Joe Biden didn't make COVID. He didn't cause COVID to be here. These tariffs and this war on Iran were not naturally occurring phenomena. They were not viruses. They're not something that had to happen to us. And that's important to note, because the two things that are causing your prices to go up right now are tariffs and this war in Iran. And in both cases, you need to be somewhat ideologically committed to saying, I'm in on this. I am ready. You put those tariffs in there because we're going to bring all the factories back, and I'm part of this fight. Short-term pain for long-term gain. Same thing with Iran. Short-term pain for long-term gain. They've not sold Americans on why there should be any short-term pain for either of those two things. And when it comes to both of them, probably more the war than tariffs, might be more than short-term. The
I
pain
was
might be more
just
than
about
short
to
term.
say the difference is with the tariffs. When and if the president would say, okay, forget Liberation Day. Okay, we're not going to do it. Basically, every other country, every business out there was like, great, super, lower the tariffs, no tariffs, we're on board. That's not the case with Iran.
Right.
Okay? And for Iran, what winning looks like is wildly different from what winning looks like for us. As long as Iran is still in the ring, okay, as long as Iran is not completely knocked out, that's a win for them. And as it relates to, well, the country's really suffering, the military's been destroyed, the people are suffering, they don't care. They've been hurting their own people for north of 50 years.
A long time. Right. And so at some point, what does success look like? To me, and I was there when that first deal was done in 2015, and I spoke to a lot of Iranians. You know what success looks like to them? Real freedom, real democracy, a real life, money that doesn't collapse, trading with the world. It's not, regime change is a cool thing to say when you don't live somewhere, but that's not the thing that actually affects people's daily lives. So if that were our goal and you were to somehow, and I still don't think you could rally the American people around we're going to war to make life better for the Iranian people, because generally speaking, it's very hard for people to rally against someone else's war. But that's not even been sold to us. And then on top of it, there is the actual, can you tell me, if you can't tell me exactly why we're at this war or exactly what success looks like, let's just talk about what it costs us. And so Pete Hegseth, who's trying very officially now to get the name of the Defense Department changed to the Department of War, went before Congress and finally had to answer questions about what this war is costing.
Do we have any sound on that?
We have a really good exchange between Ro Khanna, who was asking him about the effect of the cost of this war and the war. Let's listen to this.
Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not.
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir. But let me.
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households.
So the answer from Pete Hegseth is the kind of thing you'd expect from your kid, right? When you say, why did you do X? And they'll say, well, it's something else. Number one. Number two, you know how we stopped Iran from having a nuclear bomb? The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal that we were
Obama
in.
Struck.
That
Obama struck that President Trump considered to be a failed deal. And he viewed it as a failed deal because no one stomped out of the room angry.
Right.
Because there was a negotiation and an agreement, he views that as a loss.
Yes. So point is, we had that deal. It would be lucky if we could get back into a deal like that, but we're not. So Pete Hegseth is being asked a question about the cost to the American people, and he said, what's the cost of a nuclear bomb? Just to be clear, there is nobody, maybe save Benjamin Netanyahu, who actually believes that Iran is close to having a nuclear bomb. And in order to attack America with a nuclear bomb, you'd have to put the bomb on a missile, and that missile would have to go to America. And there is 100% of people, including Netanyahu, who don't think that there is a missile that can go from from Iran to America. You could hit bases in the region, which they've been doing, but this nonsense about America was going to get hit by a nuclear bomb by Iran, is made up.
Do you actually believe that Netanyahu believes that? Or does
He's been saying it for a long time.
Does he need to say that to convince Donald Trump to get on board? Because remember, the New York Times reporting from Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman, what was it, 2 weeks ago, sort of the meetings that led to our strike on Iran. People in the administration were not pushing the president. It was Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes.
He came to the White House to meet the president. They met in the Situation Room. The president did not sit at the head of the table. They sat across from one another. And it was Bibi Netanyahu that convinced him. And I believe it was J.D. Vance who said, I'm not so sure about this. And other people weren't gung-ho, but they were silent because they could read the room, i.e. read Trump, and they could tell that's what Trump wanted to do.
But it's a great argument, right? Right, Stephanie? Like, if you told me, why'd you pay that much for your lunch? And I say, well, because if I walked another block, I might get hit by a nuclear bomb. Like, that's just not you can't just say that in answer. You're the defense secretary being asked a question in Congress under oath about the cost of this war. That's just, it's a question and answer. You can't just drop the nuclear bomb answer to everything, especially when it's not backed up by truth. But in the end, you're right, Stephanie. The minutia here doesn't matter. What matters is that people need to understand it's costing them more money, and they had better be convinced that there's some value in that investment. A lot of wars get started, and people are behind them. Generally, when wars go on for a long time, people lose interest in them, and they stop supporting them. Most wars go from popular to unpopular. This one started at unpopular and got more unpopular.
And what did we learn today from the comptroller? That the Iran war so far has cost $25 billion. Pete Hegseth is there today to seek a budget to the tune of $1.5 trillion with a T dollars.
Most
and the
countries
reason
don't spend that much money to operate, just to be clear. This is just our defense budget.
And just imagine what Pete Hegseth is there to try to achieve today. And imagine what he has to defend, what he is asking our military to do as men and women are on the other side of the country, the other side of the world defending this. And I'm going to say he's behaving wholly unserious today in that hearing.
Yeah.
Before, he spent time earlier this week with Kid Rock, the pop performer from the late 1990s. And then today, before he went into the hearing, he was posting, cartoon posts with a cartoon image of him and Franklin, the turtle. And I'm just saying, you're the Secretary of Defense during a war asking for $1.5 trillion. And his approach in the hearing has basically been, I'm rubber and you're glue.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's, remember, Vietnam, unpopular. Afghanistan, unpopular. Iraq, unpopular. But at least there were people in charge of those things who you may not have ideologically agreed with, but were not acting like a joke. They were not actually taking this as unserious. And I think seriousness is important, because every time we don't listen to Hegseth or one of the White House or the administration people about this war, it sounds a lot like what our intrepid reporter Alex Tabbitt has been hearing from people on the street. And we want to hear from you, by the way, who are listening to us, Velshi Rule at ms.now. But let's just listen, because Alex has been relentless. He's going out there and talking to people in Florida, which much of which is Trumpy country, about the effect this war is having on them, particularly as it relates to affordability. Let's play this.
I think he's arguing that the ballroom is going to be paid for by donors, but he says that he needs it for safety. There was a shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Do you think the ballroom should be the focus of the president right now?
No, sir. The American economy needs to be the focus of the economy right now. I mean, of the people right now. The American economy. Everybody's suffering.
I think there's a lot of things we need to work on before we're doing a ballroom reconstruction. So I think it's a little ridiculous to me.
A ballroom is kind of insufficient right now. That's just my thought, that's my opinion. I really can't say what's going to happen, but at the same time, you got to understand that there's people out here suffering. There's people out here struggling. There's no food. We can't really survive out here.
And so the ballroom, you know why the ballroom came up? We wouldn't have otherwise been talking about the ballroom. Sunday morning, I'm on TV covering the stuff that happened the night before at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We're still in breaking news, right? The whole studio's red, and we got breaking news, and we're all talking about this potential assassination plot. Donald Trump has moved on. He is talking about, now, if only I had a ballroom, this wouldn't have happened. He brought up the ballroom again. It's like this is a pitch
here's the thing.
for a ballroom.
They're unfortunate moments, but a president, a political leader, has these moments that they do not ask for, oftentimes after crisis or tragedy, when they can say, let's put everybody's bad behavior aside. Let's put my name calling and your name calling. Let's put all of this aside, press pause, and for the sake of humanity, for the sake of decency, let's come together. And we were not even 15 hours out, right? What time were you on TV on Sunday morning when this happened?
I started at 10.
Okay.
So 11 and a half hours out, yeah.
The shots were fired at 8:36 p.m. on Saturday night. So here you are, hours later, and the president isn't already campaigning for this to be the reason he now is soliciting $400 million for a ballroom. He's got the entire right-wing influencer media universe pumping out this identical message on social media.
Right.
But here's the head scratcher where it doesn't make sense. The president has been saying it over and over. He said it to me personally. As it relates to the ballroom, he said it's ahead of schedule, under budget. And that budget was completely covered by private donors, individual big donors, corporations. And he said he himself, Donald John Trump. So at what point was someone lying? Was the president or were Republicans misrepresenting it then when they said this thing was fully paid for? Or are they misrepresenting it now when they're saying they need another $400 million to finish this thing from Congress? One of them has to be true. One of them has to be false. I'd like to know what it is. And the thing is, those people right there, they weren't griping about whether or not the president said he was going to pay for it. These people are saying, I can't afford gas, right? I can't afford just my regular everyday life. What in holy hell do we need to spend $400 million on a grand ballroom when none of those voters who are going to pay for it are ever going to set foot in that ballroom?
Yes. By the way, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, wherever, and there are a lot of opinions, there's been a lot of ink spilled on it before and after about its value and what relationship, journalists should have with the administration. But whatever you think about it, it's run by the White House Correspondents Association. It's not an official function of the White House. There's zero reason why that event would have been at the White House ballroom anyway. So the whole thing is just a convoluted mess. It doesn't make sense at all.
It's just to immediately politicize it. This is a horrible, terrible tragedy that we have to get to the bottom of and figure out how do we make things, people, events more safe and secure. I don't know how this translates into a political campaign to raise $400 million.
So you saw the poll from Gallup, right? It's pretty stunning. Gallup has this poll in which they asked America about their personal financial situation. 55% of Americans say it's getting worse. I think this may be one of the highest numbers in a quarter of a century. It's a very high number.
People have not felt this bad about their financial situation in this century.
Right.
So during COVID, during the Great Recession, still people feel worse now. And you could say, well, that's part of the vibe session. Well, it is. Especially, you have an administration that's saying affordability isn't an issue.
Yeah.
People, even if they have jobs right now, are sort of gripping their seats, panic that AI is going to take their jobs away. And the dirty little secret, one of the reasons the stock market is performing so well and corporate earnings are strong is because wink, wink, hush, hush, investors know that more and more companies are going to improve productivity and optimize their businesses, and doing that via artificial intelligence, and they will be laying off huge amounts of people.
And by the way,
so when scores of people lose their jobs, that's going to be bad for our country. It's going to be bad for our culture. It's going to be bad for our economy. But the businesses that are about to lay those people off and the investors that are about to buy the stocks of those businesses, it's not on them to fix it, and they're not looking to.
And remember that in this economy, in the American economy, vibes actually matter. Right? How people feel is much more important than most other inputs into this economy. I will say, here's my thinking on this, because having covered several recessions and bad things with the economy, I'm not sure empirically that this is worse. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of ways you can measure that. But here's the difference. In earlier recessions, or let's go back to even 2008, the housing crisis that led to a recession, you had at the time, Presidents Bush and then Obama, you had them bringing in their best people. The Ben Bernanke was the chair of the Fed. They brought Paul Volcker back. They brought all these people they brought Rubin back from Goldman Sachs. I mean, they brought all these people in who made it feel like this was an all of government effort to save things. And what you see here is that a bad economy or tough times or inaffordability that is largely fueled by tariffs and an increase in oil prices, that my government's doing to me. Like, are you on my side? Are you helping me get out of this? Or are you actually making it worse? Even with AI, how many times have you and I said, I think AI is going to do great things. I think it's going to solve diseases that we haven't got solved. But it is going to displace people from their jobs. And it could do with a little bit of regulation. Just a little bit. Just somebody in government saying, hey, this isn't a free-for-all. We're going to put some guardrails around this. And yet we aren't even doing that. So at this point,
that's not to be That's not to be anti-AI, Alan,
not at all.
But what I am doing is pleading with a government body, a task force, a public-private partnership, take your pick, that's going to at least address this. Because the last time we had a dislocation this massive was globalization. When we hollowed out manufacturing jobs in the United States and sent them around the world, the effects of that are still plaguing this country 50 plus years later.
That is a preparation. And while Kushner and Witkoff fly back to Pakistan for another round of talks, both of them receiving billions from the same Gulf states, they're negotiating alongside DOJ quiet. The investigation that was launched specifically to intimidate Powell into lowering interest rates dropped because one outgoing Republican senator with nothing to lose said no, and Trump had no answer for it. The mob boss theory of governance works at the percent of approval. At 37%, it just looks like what it always was. The SPLG indictment, the part that should alarm most. The organization that broke the Ku Klux Klan financially, that tracked white supremacist groups for decades, now indicted by Trump's Justice Department on argument that fighting racism is actually funding racism.
Okay, you guys may not be shocked to hear that Donald Trump wants his smiling, attractive mug face on yet another item, and this time it is the U.S. passport. And I just have to show you a picture of this passport. Now, if you recognize that photo or it looks familiar, that is because that is, of course, the beautiful, I say ironically, scowling inaugural photo that Trump took. And that is, it's creepily similar, I would note, to his mugshot from Fulton County. And that's apparently a pose that he looked in the mirror and he thinks, that's really working for me. But that is on passports. And but the thing you should know about this is that these are special edition passports. They are going to be given out around the 250th anniversary. I wonder so many things, like who wants a passport with a version of a mugshot of a very unpopular president in it to go to other countries and say, hey, please let me into your country. But that, I guess, is a choice some people may make. We will see. Now, as we know, this is not the first time. Trump loves having his face on things. It's like one of his personal obsessions. It makes him feel good about himself. Who knows? But just to give you a sense, and I don't want to miss any of the things here, Trump was on, remember when he was on the National Park Pass? He's going to be on the National Park Pass too, I should say. There we are. Same vibe there. Same mugshot vibe going there. So if you're going to go to a national park, welcome to that commemorative item you have there. Also, similar facial expression to the $1 coin on a gold coin. That one looks a little bit friendlier. There's a really low bar. Oh, that one looks scary with the fists on the desk. Who chooses these freaking things? The point, though, is that Trump wants his face on as many things as possible, and he's using the 250th anniversary of our country to commemorate that. Now, well, that is all weird, creepy. Who wants these things? Where are they going? Will they be even able to give these passports away? There are some people who are having a lot of fun with it, and I kind of love this. This is just so fun. Okay, so one of them is the House Majority PAC. So let me show you this. They made a fake passport with Trump and Epstein on it. They're smiling. They're mugging. Trump was still going for his, flow over hair vibe situation there. Epstein's leaning in. I love everything about this fake photo. Okay, there's also the governor of California, always loves to mock Trump. He made a fake California driver's license in honor of California's 157th anniversary, obviously a play on the 250th anniversary. So this is there, again, a mock, a joke, making fun of Donald Trump and his obsession with having a version of his own mugshot on as many things as are humanly possible. Not to be forgotten, and this may be one of my favorites, Governor J.B. Pritzker, who always loves to just troll a little bit. There's J.B. Pritzker on a bottle of Malort liqueur, which is a huge thing in Illinois. I actually have a bottle of Malort on on my cabinet here in my bookshelf. Huge thing in Illinois. There's his face on it. He's making fun of Trump, too. Two can play that game is what was in the tweet from J.B. Pritzker, which I totally love. Now, the other thing that's so funny and hilarious and sad about this is that the Trump White House has gone on they're a little defensive about the critiques of Trump's mug being in a passport photo because it is so absurd. Of course, they're on defense. And so they have used the fact that Obama's face was on a commemorative Metro card around Inauguration Day back in 2009. Now, I remember this. This has nothing to do. This wasn't made by the Obama White House. This was actually made by the Metro, not Barack Obama. He was inaugurated. That was what it was about. Again, not something produced by the Obama campaign, by the White House. Totally different thing. Sorry that didn't work out for you. So for all of you out there, I seriously hope you're not in a position where the only option is the Trump passport, because, you only renew passports like every 10 years or something. So that would be a huge, tremendous bummer. And I'm relieved I don't need to renew mine this year. Okay, speaking of people in the White House or in this administration who are just doing things that you're like, what in the hell? Because sometimes that's the only thing you can say. Well, Pete Hegseth, always a candidate for this, always, when he's out speaking in public, every time he gives a press conference. And this week, he is testifying on Capitol Hill before the House and the Senate. The House on Wednesday, the Senate on Thursday. And in the House, he went with prepared remarks. That's what everybody starts off these testimonies with. And in those prepared remarks, he said this.
The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans 2 months in. I remind you, 2 months in to a conflict. Lest I remind you, and my generation understands how long we were in Iraq, how long we were in Afghanistan, how long we were in Vietnam. 2 months in on an existential fight for the safety of the American people, Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb. We are proud of this undertaking.
There are so many things to unpack there. First of all, he wrote that down. That was a talking point he was prepared to give. Second of all, he's saying that Democrats and some Republicans are the biggest problems. Buddy, you're at war with the Iranians. The biggest problems are the Strait of Hormuz is closed. We don't know when it will reopen. And if it reopens, it's going to take months. And so gas prices are still going to be high. The biggest problem is the 13 members of the military whose lives have been lost. The biggest problem is the fact that all of these military, a lot of them who are guarding the Strait of Hormuz, reportedly don't even have enough food. There was actually a report this week where a mother reported that her son had lost 17 pounds because there wasn't enough food to eat. That is a person who was serving in the military for our country. Okay, so Pete Hegseth, the Democrats and Republicans, I don't even know what you're talking. That's not your biggest problem. They're asking you questions. Here's the other thing about what he said. Now, Trump made this comparison a week or two ago, and I thought it was completely insane in the moment, but he says a lot of completely insane things. Pete Hegseth wrote this point down and said, you know what? This is such a good point. I'm going to keep making it, which is saying basically, hold on, everyone, be patient. The war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, which Trump also referenced, those were really long. So we're only a few weeks into this. First of all, Vietnam, all of these wars, frankly, were massive disasters, quagmires, as many call them. Vietnam fit more than 58,000. I should know that number off the top of my head. 58,000 U.S. troops died in Vietnam, and the U.S. was involved in that directly for 8 years. Obviously, the conflict went on for much longer. Why are you making that comparison? If that is the talking point you are using, the problems may be even more serious than we are aware of. But the thing that I took away from this whole thing today is this is not, he is the most unqualified person to have ever had this job. Never mind all of the different ways that should have disqualified him about his personal life choices before he was nominated for this job. But beyond that, he is not a policy guy. He couldn't answer basic policy questions about a war, which is a very serious issue. Okay, meanwhile, middle of the war, Secretary of Defense or War, whatever the guy wants to freaking call himself, is testifying this week. Very serious thing, 2 days, right? What is the White House focused on? Well, guess what? The White House is focusing in part on getting Jimmy Kimmel fired again. Now, if this sounds familiar, it should, because we went through this whole thing last fall where they tried to get him fired. And this time it is Melania Trump, the first lady. No clue why she thinks she has the power to call for this or anything really, calling for Jimmy Kimmel to get fired. And it's all over a joke that Jimmy Kimmel made before the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So just to remind you, I'm just going to play what he said.
And of course, our First Lady Melania is here. Look at Melania, so beautiful. Mrs. Trump, you have a glow like an expectant widow.
Now, okay, you don't have to love the joke, but he was not. What was he predicting? There was going to be a shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday? No, he was giving a speech from a comedian because there wasn't going to be a comedian at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Now, to add to this, but after that, they called on him. They said he has to be fired. You know, the same kind of spiel that we saw in the fall. Now, to add to this, Trump yesterday made a joke that, well, had some similar tones about the age gap. That was an age joke about Trump being old and Melania being much younger, decades younger. Here's what his joke that he made that was about his age just this week.
She came to America at 19, met my incredible father. We loved him so much. We all loved him. We loved her. We loved him, Fred, and they were married for 63 years. And excuse me if you don't mind. That's a record we won't be able to match, darling. I'm sorry. Just not going to work out that way. We'll do well, but we're not going to do that well. 63 years.
Okay. Yeah, because he's a lot older than her. So there's a joke. Different. But the point is, nobody thought Jimmy Kimmel was predicting or rooting for a shooter to come to the White House Correspondents' Center. That is freaking insane. Just like nobody thought when Caroline Leavitt made a joke before the press conference, before the White House Correspondents' Center, that she was alluding to, or that she was predicting, or that she was rooting for shots to be fired. Here's what she said.
It'll be funny. It'll be entertaining. There will be some shots fired tonight in the room. So everyone should tune in. It's going to be really great. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
I love it.
Now, obviously, she did not mean gunshots. Obviously, she meant jokes. But also, Jimmy Kimmel was making a joke days before the Correspondents' Dinner, and they're using this to go back to the old, tired playbook. It's like an old dog with no new tricks, once again. Now, this may not surprise you that while their focus seems to be, while we're in the middle of a war, on things like getting Jimmy Kimmel fired or trying to indict James Comey again, they like to go back to the same well over and over again. There is some poll numbers, and this is maybe what is driving Trump crazy and what is making him kind of go back to the same folders or the same playbooks. It's like they have files they give him when he's kind of acting frenetic, and they're like, good, go indict Comey or go yell at Jimmy Kimmel, and maybe that'll make you feel better. Well, listen to their poll numbers, because Word has released new polling this week, and their poll numbers are at the lowest approval rating yet. 34% approve and 64% disapprove. That is an enormous number. And since the beginning of March, just to give you a sense, that's down by 5 points, just since the beginning of March. So not even 2 months, down by 5 points. And that's even actually also right around the time when the war started. So that tells you also a lot about kind of the impact of the war. But the interesting thing about this that I have been thinking about a lot, and I know a lot of people have been thinking about, is who are these people, whether it's the 5% who supported him in March and now don't, or a greater percentage who supported Trump at the beginning of his term that now don't? Who are they? Well, here's a very interesting project, because this past week, somebody on X, Twitter, whatever the hell we're calling it these days, posted a billboard in Iowa that reads, "Having doubts? You're not alone," and plugs a website. You can see it right there, basically dedicated to helping Trump supporters, cultists, whatever they are, leave MAGA if they want to leave MAGA. And there are some really interesting stories. You can actually go to this website and you can see some of these, but I'm going to show you some of them. Interesting stories of people, including, this one is super fascinating. Okay, a woman by the name of Victoria. I'm going to play it for you. She was not aware. She didn't even know January 6th happened. And when she found out about it, she was done. Okay, so listen to what she has to say.
I'd been assigned to watch a PBS documentary about January 6th. I remember them talking about the Proud Boys, and I was like, what are the Proud Boys? What is this? And watching that documentary, I learned a lot of really, really not so nice truths about Trump. And that led me down this path of asking questions. Did this really happen? Could I have context on this? At the core of MAGA, I believe that people want to love America, not the America that is, but the idea of America, right? And I love the idea of America. So to think that people could go and assault like the foundations of what this country is, like they preach constitutionalism, but then disregard it when it does not suit them. And that was a big breaking point for me. What were the contradictions? Once I saw them, like there were so many contradictions.
I mean, look, I think people out there might say, how did she not know about January 6th? Be quiet. That's not the question to be asking right now. The question is, people like her, this is a great website. It's like, who needs to know more information about what this guy is actually about? Who may not watch MS Now. They may not watch Midas Touch or listen to it. They may not listen to Pod Save America, whatever else it may be, and allow for a bridge for these people to walk over it to the side that is not supporting somebody who played a role in January 6th. So that, I think, is super interesting. Okay, there's another one. I mean, there are lots of them, but there are a couple that stuck out to us. And one of them is from a guy named Michael from Ohio. And what was his hard stop? Well, the villainization of immigrants. And like, Lord knows, that has been central. I see you, Stephen Miller, to what Trumpism is all about. But it's interesting to hear people talk about it and this realization of the impact of it on their actual lives. So just listen to what Michael had to say.
I feel the way you talk as a leader really matters. At some point, it's not just words, and it affects people's lives. And the immigration process is already really hard as it is, and it takes a long time. And if they're drumming up fear about immigrants, I feel like it's going to make it almost impossible for me to bring her over here. And yeah, I'm really concerned about that.
Okay, so he's talking about the fact that his girlfriend is from the Philippines and he's seeing the impact on his life. And again, you may say, well, Stephen Miller was in the first White House. That's true. But you know what? Everything is worse this term. And I think the more people like Michael and like Victoria can see, like, this is not what they thought they were signing up for, the more we're going to see that 5% get even larger. We will see. But super interesting website. And I'll be digging through it more.